we're always developing new ideas. Right now, we're in the process of developing an extreme Credo. Extreme Credo. It's really in the developmental stages right now because it's a little controversial because this game is really not for kids.
Sometimes it just doesn't seem fair. You know, it's like when you're a kid and you lose your pencil. I always kept a spare pencil.
You really don't want your kids playing this game because the way it works is you not only break down the structures. After the structures are broken down, you actually destroy the pieces themselves. You take anything you can, a hammer, blowtorch, whatever necessary, bring them down to rubble, to ash, and then at that point you build it back from there. You build your structures, you build it back.
I'll give you an example. I'm walking down the boardwalk one day and I step into something wet. So now my shoe is all wet. So what do? So I take it off. Why? That's how it is. You see what I'm saying?
Extreme Credo is that's the real thing. When you bring it back from rubble, that's when you really see what you believe in.
800 years ago, the Jewish people mourned the death of Rabbi Moses Maimonides, the illustrious Rambam. It was Maimonides who cut the precious diamond known as the 13 roots of the Jewish creed. During this octocentennial year, a group of enterprising university students turned to a mysterious etching from the Cairo Geniza to create a mind-bending challenge of faith for the 21st century. The name of the game, Credo 13.
Welcome to Credo 13. I'm Michael Kegel. The 13th and final root belief of the Maimonidean Creed is that the dead will rise.
And the final principle, right, is the principle of the resurrection of the dead.
Resurrection of the dead.
For me, it happens to be the easiest one intellectually. It's surprising.
Final principle.
Last principle, the very controversial one.
And that's the resurrection of the dead.
Now, this can be discussed for hours and hours and hours.
He says the 13th fundamental principle is the resurrection of the dead, as we already explained it.
Maimonides explains the following. I believe in the full belief that you'll have the resurrection at the time when God see fit.
Problem is, he doesn't seem to explain it anywhere.
So in many ways, resurrection of the dead is such an interesting concept.
Credo is really the heart of Jewish eschatology.
The resurrection of the dead is only for the righteous.
Always, if you want to look at what's essential to Jewish faith, it's the Siddur, and of course the prayer, more than anything else, 3 times a day. Baruch Atah Hashem, the third bracha of the tefillah, the prayer, the Amidah, the standing prayer, is Mechayeh Metim, Baruch Atah Hashem Mechayeh Metim, blessed is God who brings life to the dead. Now, some modern translations of have granted us immortal life and this sort of thing. It's bad theology and even worse, philosophy. Mechayeh Metim literally means God will restore the dead to life. And obviously a very different world than the one in which they lived in. But where still the body that I'll be restored to is identifiable.
The position of Maimonides is that resurrection of the dead is a return to this world. A return to this world.
And there's a dispute what form resurrection takes. But Rambam is not talking about that. His belief is different than others. He believes that the ultimate good is to go back to normal body. After Tchesa Mesim, after resurrection, there'll be a post-Tchesa Mesim.
In the mystical tradition, there are other opinions. But this is the position of Maimonides, that at a given point, during the Messianic age, the righteous are going to come back to this world.
Just as a good Credo game is worth revisiting. In fact, in our final Credo drama, number 13, each player is required to rebuild her structure from the previous game, down to the last detail. But just as the game picks up speed, the great question arises, how many Credo players does it take to screw in,
Did you see the light? bulb burnt out, but it just went back on.
But it's pitch black in here.
But the light just went on.
I think the bulb's out.
We saw it burn out.
I saw it burn out.
That's why it's so dark in here.
But then it went on.
After it broke?
Must not have broken.
I checked it. I watched.
It just came back on.
It does seem brighter.
Because the light went back on.
Who flipped the switch?
It just came back on.
But can a broken light bulb come back to life after the broken pieces have been put into 2 garbage cans?
But there's a book written by Sadia Gaon called Hatria Vapidus, what it's going to look like. Sadia Gaon wrote a book with complicated questions, unbelievably complicated questions of how Mashiach is going to look when he comes. One of them is, what does a woman do if she's married to 2 husbands?
There were so many discussions in Jewish literature about when you're resurrected. Are you resurrected as a young person, as an adult? If you had 2 wives, which wife?
How long will a person live for? There's multiple questions. In the back of Shuvas Hagonim, in the back of Sadia, this whole Sefer Triva, a number of it. Just unbelievable.
There's one little problem with this whole thing.
Any kind of attempt to describe that gets kind of silly. A map to heaven, or a blueprint of heaven.
If you really understand that when you die, you leave this existence where time doesn't exist. So when you're talking about entering into the realm of the souls, which is above time, and therefore in a realm that I can't comprehend, that realm is already connected to the realm of the future anyways.
I don't believe that that people kind of go to heaven and that somebody's there waiting for you. And, well, I've been here for 20 years, and I guess God has just told me that, my parent or my spouse or my child, the person I miss the most, will be here in another 5 years or so. I mean, I don't think it really works that way.
Once you die, you're not in a realm of time.
When you go to sleep at night and you wake up in the morning, you have a sense that some time has elapsed, especially if you've dreamt. If sometimes something elapsed. I mean, you're not quite sure what you were doing when you're sleeping and everything, but there's a sense of time. If you're really put into deeper sleep, like under anesthesia, when you wake up from anesthesia, if you've ever been under anesthetic, it's as if no time has passed at all. I think death is even more so than that anesthetic.
Somehow history collapses into a moment where perhaps the whole movement begins to make sense.
I prefer the sun.
You don't use electric?
Bulbs are deficient.
The sun causes blindness.
The bulbs come and go.
They fade.
They fail.
They short circuit.
They break. They lose focus. Bulbs dwindle.
They collapse.
Bulbs are deficient.
Sunlight is optimal.
Light is optimal.
And where is the light?
The light's in the bulb.
Lights don't just...
Sometimes.
I've never heard.
Well, I hate to admit.
Because you'd be lying.
Because I think that I was. You think you were lying?
Because lights don't just...
They can't just start going.
That's what I'm saying.
After they've stopped?
It doesn't make any sense.
But at the same time...
The truth is the truth.
And it does seem brighter.
I really don't see it.
The truth is the truth, whether you like it or not. And what is the truth about resurrection? And did Maimonides, who articulated this truth, like it?
Traditionally, resurrection has meant literal resurrection, that the dead will rise. And that's the traditional view. Throughout history, you've had thinkers who've understood resurrection as identical with life in the world to come. Rabbi Kafich, who's a traditional interpreter of Maimonides, not a radical interpreter, saw that there's no way to make Maimonides' understanding of immortality go with resurrection. After all, if you die, your soul moves into heaven with God, united. What is it, supposed to come back down to earth? It makes no sense.
The master plan of the universe was eternal existence. That never changed.
So he says resurrection, according to Maimonides, and there's no proof for this, but you can actually read it this way, is different than what anyone ever thought. Resurrection is that the bodies will be brought to life, but not that the soul that's already lived its life will come back down and be placed in it. What point is that? He said to come back down, to eat and drink and have sex. It's already up in, it's achieved the highest state. What's the point then of resurrection? The point is to show God's ability to do miracles. And if you look in Maimonides' letter on resurrection, That's what he stresses, that resurrection shows that God does miracles, and the fact that God could take a dead body and breathe life into it, but it's not the same. There's no identity between the new body and the old one.
When you die, you die. And God, at some point at the culmination of history, will restore you to embodied life in a very different world.
The life force is being placed in the body, but the soul, which is now a perfected intellect, that remains where it is. It's moved out beyond this world.
Well, of course, Maimonides wasn't so comfortable with the resurrection, the physical resurrection of the dead. And it does seem that he downplays it in some of his writings.
He never really explains. He never explains here. He never explains in the Mishnah Torah. He never explains in the guide. He doesn't even discuss it in the guide.
Tchiyat HaMeitim is really the heart of Jewish eschatology. It's the one that Maimonides had the most problem with because he had very Platonic Aristotelian notions of the superiority of the soul over the body and therefore getting the body back. And so he had to basically argue it as kind of a divine possibility. And God could do this. He can do anything. Not necessarily that God is going to do it. He got into a lot of hot water in terms of other people in the tradition.
A lot of people challenge Rambam that he really doesn't believe in the resurrection of the dead, that only the soul lives on, but no resurrection of the dead.
Resurrection can be understood in more than one way. You can understand it as an actual physical resurrection of the dead, or you could understand it to mean life in the world to come, immortality. And that's that was the dispute. What did Maimonides mean?
Here you have two different schools of thought as to whether perfection is a stripping away of the material or an incorporating of the material.
So this became a major issue.
If you take Maimonides at his word, he believed in a physical resurrection. If you read him more esoterically, he understood resurrection as identical with life in the world to come.
He got really challenged for that, almost, with challenges of heresy.
He was being accused of being a heretic, or of at least denying a basic principle.
And the Roman himself had to write a treatise in defense of his concept of the resurrection of the dead.
In which he strongly denies that. He asserts that he does believe in resurrection. It's just that after the people die and are resurrected, they die again. The traditional understanding was after they were resurrected, they lived on, and that was the world to come, Olam Haba. For Maimonides, the world to come is where the souls are.
He understood it to be much more like resurrection of the dead for a limited period of time, then you go back to the soul existence. Others understand resurrection of the dead to be eternity from there.
It's hard to know what this immediate resurrection, this dying to be resurrected, to die again, what the significance of that is. But that's what Maimonides states.
Mamar Tchiyat HaMeitim, this treatise that he wrote because he was accused of denying it, convinced very few people.
Leading people, in particular Rabbi Samuel ben Ali of Baghdad, great Rosh Yeshiva there, to accuse Maimonides of denying resurrection. Rabbi Meir Halevi Abu Afia, he believed that Maimonides denied it. That is, they thought that he identified resurrection with eternal life.
If Maimonides were left to his own devices,
the Rambam left to his own devices would not have held that way, and he says so. Wrote a letter, said, truth is, I'm not particularly attracted to this doctrine.
I think for Maimonides, Tchiyat HaMeitim was one of these aspects of Jewish belief that he couldn't very well deny, but it didn't fit into his theological system, but he couldn't deny it as the traditional Jew that he was.
He found it expressed in the psukim, and he felt he had no choice in the matter.
It could be just another example of Maimonides' religious loyalties trumping his philosophical views. Yes, philosophically there doesn't seem to be any way to put it in, but we do have a religious tradition, and therefore, although you don't understand everything, why it is, we accept it on faith.
When people have these dilemmas of belief, this is what really happens in reality. You see evidence going one way, evidence going another way, and you say, were it not for the fact that I am convinced of X, I really would want to believe Y.
I think the Rambam was stuck with certain things that, just as we have to all grin and bear with certain things in Torah we find hard to grasp. Maybe Tchiyat HaMeitim was one of those things for Maimonides.
But again, Ikrimun are not something that a Rishon chooses or that a person chooses from a menu. It's rather a way that you choose to educate yourself. Once you commit yourself, then that is going to shape who you are.
Venu quit. He's done with yoga. He's done with everything.
What does that mean?
He thinks we are too attached to the tools. But the tools build the lamp. Venu says the lamp is an entity outside of the tools.
Outside the light?
Venu hates light.
But light meditation...
That was a joke.
He seems so intense.
Venu says it's impossible to disassociate light from its source.
He means from the bulb?
He means the power comes. Venu says the light you can't see is often the brightest. But can the same be said of yoga teachers?
Now you have to admit,
it is a bit brighter.
The bulb came back on. But how long will it last?
Venu says that there's a time for dissonance. I'll miss Venu.
Okay, you don't have to like the metaphor, but just go with me for a sec. Is indoor lighting conceivable without light bulbs? And if you break a bulb... Hi. That's really funny. Hi. Hi. We're not producing radio here. Great.
Whatever exists as part of my soul, that could be the essence of my being, but the fact is that my body is also part of my being.
Our whole person, as far as we can think and understand it, is bound up in our bodily existence and bodily experiences.
Niebuhr said that to the ancient Hebraic mind, a disembodied human existence was unintelligible. I think Niebuhr is right.
Because so much of the perfection of man and the essence of man is with his body.
That's not the Maimonidean conception, though.
Because the Rambam had a strong sense of the spiritual being higher than the physical. I think we probably don't feel that to such a sharp degree.
And here we have to see his kind of philosophical context is very, very influenced by Platonic notions of the distinction between body and soul. That the body is that which is incoherent, uncanny, dirty, and that the soul represents, as it manifests itself for human beings, especially in mind, is something which is above and seems to suggest immortality, and the body seems to suggest decay and disease and death and this sort of thing.
From Maimonides' perspective, any physical things are only... they serve as a means to an end.
Therefore, you can understand why Maimonides separates the two. Because he doesn't want the ultimate reward to be the resurrection of the dead. He wants the ultimate reward to be totally spiritual, nothing corporeal about it, nothing bodily about it.
Because he couldn't accept the notion that bodily incarnation is the ultimate purpose of humankind.
He still wants to keep, even on an exoteric reading, he has to keep the perfected intellect as the final state. So therefore he develops an idea, which is unattested elsewhere, where the souls come to life and then die again.
Ultimately, says the Rambam, we will die again and ultimately go to that place of bliss in the world to come.
So they come, they live a normal lifespan, and then they die. It's hard to make any sense of that. What's the point of that?
The question which Maimonides himself poses is that if the ultimate goal is the bliss of the next world, why would one want to come back?
The Talmud talks about the fact that when you have the soul and the body separate, then each one can say it's not my fault in a judgment. The soul will say, well, I'm pure. The reason I sinned was because of the body. You know, what are you punishing me for? Go to the body. And the body will say, what are you looking at me for? Without the soul, I'm 6 feet under. I can't do anything without the soul. So why is it my fault? It's his fault. So they argue that it's necessary to have the soul and the body get together again, joined together in order to have ultimate justice. Okay? That way the soul can't blame the body, and the body can't blame the soul.
I think what it means in existential terms is that when you're talking about reward and punishment, when you're talking about human fulfillment, you recognize human being as a psychosomatic entity.
The level of our bliss in the next world really is a function of our merit. If we lived during our lifetime successfully, and we observed the mitzvahs and we studied Torah, we will merit a loftier portion in the world to come. If we've been negligent, we will merit a diminished portion in the world to come. Sometimes this is not a consequence of choices we make. Sometimes it's simply because of circumstances. People that lived in times of persecutions, times of poverty, had less opportunity to achieve these prerequisites to the bliss in the world to come. And therefore, God says that the righteous who did their best the first time around, I will give them the chance to return in the optimal historical era, which is the Messianic age.
So there must be this point where, at the end of the whole experience of this world, whatever this world is about, that if this world has meaning and this world is to have an evaluation process of reward and punishment, then at the end of this process, the consequence must come back to me as body and soul.
The opportunity to come back is really something very, very precious, because it gives us an opportunity to do more, to learn more, to observe more.
We have to recognize that ultimately where everything ends up has to deal with the unity of our very individuality. We have to be connected as body and soul again in order to deal with the final results of who we are. So along the path of history, at the end of history, there is some individual accounting to the unified being of body and soul.
I'll give you an example. A person works at a job and receives a weekly paycheck. That's blissful. But when the work is completed, let's say his task is to build a house, and this is a project of several months. So every week he gets his paycheck. So that's one level of bliss. But the satisfaction at seeing the completed house, that's a different type of bliss. So it's really the same thing.
That embodiedness, that is the final reward, the final effect.
The resurrection is really an opportunity to come, see the finished job, take satisfaction and pride in the fact that hopefully we made a contribution towards that.
And here it is. I mean, it's part of our egocentrism, whatever. I hope, as King David hoped, that I'll be part of it. I don't know. I have no guarantees. But I hope that I'll be part of it. And even if I'm not part of it, I hope that the tzaddikim will be part of it.
Credo.